Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Psalms and Psychology. I'm Zach, here with the incredible host, Mrs. Reema Angelique. How are you doing today?
Hey, everyone, and I am doing well. How are you?
I'm actually really excited about this episode tonight. You know, we're talking about something that, unfortunately, a lot of people have experience with, or it affects them still to this day, and even you, Reema. I know you're very vulnerable with this, and you talk about it a lot on Instagram, and you know, you make posts about it, and it's something that a lot of people can relate to. So do you want to tell them what we're talking about?
Yes, you guys, we're going to be talking about trauma. We're going to talk about what is trauma. We're going to talk about the effects of trauma. We're going to talk a little bit about PTSD. Can anything good come from trauma? And then how do you heal? Now, I want to say this thing can have 10 different parts. We're not going to be able to talk about everything today. That's just a fact. So you guys, don't get overwhelmed. We might even dive into a lot of different complex topics. I'm going to try to keep it simple and also lighthearted at the same time. Me and Zach like to keep things light. It might be a little heavy at times, especially if you didn't realize maybe some things in your life that were trauma responses. But we also want to say this one thing. This is not a replacement for mental health treatment or any professional care. This is purely for educational purposes, so don't be afraid to reach out to a mental health professional if you feel like you relate to this episode.
Yeah, if you feel like you relate to this episode, you probably should reach out to a mental health professional.
Good reframe. That's very true.
All right, so would you like to tell everyone or read our psalm today, Reema?
Yes, so we're going to be in Psalm 23, verse 4. It says, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me."
Iconic.
Yes, I love this verse. Of course, it's iconic. And it just is a reminder that the Lord is always with you in every dark valley that you walk through. Even when you don't feel him, he's there. And sometimes you don't feel him because it's not even your own. I know I saw a post recently on Facebook where somebody, I'm in a lot of different like Christian groups on Facebook. And somebody asked, I felt God and I don't feel him anymore, and I think he left me. And there was a lot of people in those comments, and they were so uplifting and encouraging, and I just saw so many beautiful responses. But I didn't see a response that said that sometimes, which I don't know how you're going to say this in a nice way, I don't know. Sometimes God withdraws a sense of his presence, and it doesn't mean he's not there. It doesn't mean that. Sometimes he withdraws a sense of his presence so you can learn how much you truly need him. If you don't think God withdraws a sense of his presence, look in the book of Job. It said God withdrew a sense of his presence from Job, which is crazy because Job was such a righteous man.
Exactly, but that just goes to show, you know, sometimes God will do that, and it's going to be a test, and he might put you through something that you don't understand why you're going through it in the moment. But later on, if you give it enough time, I promise you, you will see why you went through that.
You will, and you can also, so many fruits can come from what you've been through.
Amen. And it's not even just for you. It's for other people that may be experiencing something later on that you will run into in an encounter.
I was going to say that. That was on my heart. I was thinking about how many people can be saved through your testimony of God's goodness. And so we're going to talk about trauma. And we're going to talk about the biblical implications of trauma too. So trauma is defined as a negative experience that results in a significant disruption of your overall physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being. Now, I came up with this working definition of trauma after seeing in the field. There are so many different definitions of trauma. If you look at the DSM-5 revised version, to get a diagnosis of PTSD, you need a main index event trauma.
And what is that?
Main index event trauma is when you have been experienced to just an egregious event like being exposed to sexual violence or somebody trying to kill you. These are very huge index events where usually if you think of it as the main event that catalyzed your PTSD.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes, and then there's complex trauma. Complex trauma are smaller compounded events over time that can affect you and also create traumatic stress. And that might not be being exposed to death or sexual violence. That could be neglect, abuse from a parent, emotional abuse, bullying, your parents' divorce, so many different things that can qualify, but they don't meet the standard definition of PTSD. Now, there used to be a complex PTSD diagnosis in the DSM, and they don't have it anymore. And so I find that to be pretty problematic, especially because not everybody has been exposed to like war or seeing something like their friend being killed in front of them, but they still have trauma. They still have some PTSD effects. So we're going to talk about PTSD, but I want you to be thinking about it in maybe a little different way than the DSM. The ICD-10 codes have a complex trauma diagnosis, and that's not used as much in the mental health field in the United States, but it's still out there, and it's something to think about. It's just a really big conversation in the field, and I think it should continue to be had. You know, trauma affects everybody in a different way. It can look different from different people. It's so complex. And I want to talk a little bit about adverse childhood experiences, known as ACEs. If you guys know anything about my childhood, I know what ACEs are. These are the things that can definitely qualify as trauma. There's a scale that I'm going to read to you guys really quickly. There's a 1 through 10 items on there. Basically, you score your items on there, and they've done a lot of research. The more items you meet criteria for on this scale, the more likely you are to have a lot of effects mentally, physically, even spiritually. You could have some immune system effects. Like, I'm telling you, there are so many. Like, your life expectancy goes down, more likely to abuse substances, engage in risky behaviors, all those kind of things.
So you're telling me this is a test that you do not want to pass?
Yeah, this is a test you definitely don't want to pass.
All right. So would you like to go over some of those?
Oh, yeah. So, number 1, did you feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you or take care of you? Number 2, did you lose a parent through divorce, abandonment, death, or any other reason? Number 3, did you live with anyone who was depressed, mentally ill, or attempted suicide? Number 4, did you live with anyone who had a problem with drinking or using drugs, including prescription drugs? Number 5, did your parents or adults in your home ever hit, punch, beat, or threaten to harm each other? It didn't have to be physical. It could also be a threat. 6, did you live with anyone who went to jail or prison? 7, did a parent or adult in your home ever swear at you, insult you, or put you down? 8, did a parent or adult in your home ever hit, beat, kick, or physically hurt you in any way? 9, did you feel that no one in your home loved you or thought you were special? Or 10, did you experience unwanted sexual contact at all? Now, when I look at that list, I kind of feel choked up in my voice because it's so heavy and it's so sad that so many children go through these things. And thinking back, I meet 9 of these 10 from my childhood. I don't know if you guys have read Little House on Ansley. That's just the book that I published that goes over my story and my testimony of the way that the Lord has moved in my life. And maybe we'll even make a podcast on it one day. And the Lord will come out podcast episode after podcast episode. But these things really developmentally will stick with you. And they have such an effect on every area of your life and how you operate in your relationship with the Lord. These things are called developmental trauma. And they can directly impact your relationship with God and how you relate with Him. The relationship you had with your parents can, and we talked about this a little bit in the first episode, but that can affect what you call an attachment style, which is how you relate with people in your life. And your attachment style can also relate with how you interact with God, and do you come to Him or not? Yes, and what you'll see in trauma diagnoses, specifically PTSD, a huge attachment style that comes out of PTSD is avoidant attachment style. Yes, avoidant attachment style is where you flee intimacy. And I don't mean like that in the relationship sense of romantic only. It could be intimacy in friendships, intimacy with God. You flee it. You kind of pursue it. You might pursue it a little bit, but the second it starts to get deep and there's some vulnerabilities, you're out. This is why that guy that has a lot of trauma ghosted you. No, I don't know. I don't know why he ghosted you. I don't know.
There could be other reasons, you know.
Yeah, but that's avoidant. That's where you like, oh, why did I had such a connection with this person, or maybe you feel like you connected with a friend, and then they just dip when things start to get kind of like really good, you know? That can happen sometimes. So
And it's not your own fault. Like, it's not your fault. You know, it's nothing
No.
you did. It's them and something that they're going through, the way they learn to cope with something. It's still affecting them and causing them problems in their future relationships.
Yes, and the core fear there is getting hurt because somebody learned down the line that because maybe with their caregiver in childhood, when they showed emotion or they showed vulnerability, it was met with some invalidation. And so they learned at a very young age that it wasn't safe. And that's how people are going to hurt you when they get to know your vulnerabilities, because there are some parents, some narcissistic parents or just really hateful parents who they will use those things against you, your vulnerabilities and your weaknesses.
And that's heartbreaking to hear. And my heart truly does go out to anyone that experienced that, or any of these ACEs. Like, just one is too many. And I can't imagine people that have experienced multiple of them. And unfortunately, a lot of people have. So, how much of the U.S. do you think has experienced trauma?
Well, it's not what I think. The research shows that 70% of people have experienced trauma in the United States. I can only imagine what it would be like in other countries too.
Wow.
And then 90% of that 70% have had more than one traumatic event in their lives.
Wow, that's horrible.
Yeah. So, and what I find with trauma is it's not always about what happened, but it's how we interpret and understand these events, either cognitively or in our body.
So, like, what would that be?
Yeah, so what I mean is there's a development of PTSD that can come from how you've interpreted the things you've been through.
Oh, so are you basically saying that, like, two people could go through very similar experiences, but one person develops PTSD because of how they are handling it, and another person won't develop it?
Absolutely. Yeah, two siblings can go through the same childhood, and, you know, they could go through the exact same childhood and have totally different effects. One person could get PTSD and one maybe not. And we don't fully know all the reasons why that occurs. I know, for example, women are more likely to get PTSD, or at least more likely to be diagnosed with it.
I wonder why that is.
Yeah, maybe there's stigma there. There could be other biological factors or things like that, sociocultural factors that I don't really know, or even the research. It's very hard to understand the etiology of things like this, but it's a very interesting conversation. About 3.5% of adults have PTSD every year in the United States, which is a lot, but it's not 70%. So it shows you that sometimes people really just don't get PTSD.
Okay, yeah, so there's a lot of people that can experience trauma that will not result in PTSD.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about what differentiates PTSD other than just normal traumatic responses, right? Because it makes sense that you're going to be affected by the things you've been through. Now, what is PTSD? It is the mental disorder that comes from trauma when somebody hasn't been able to integrate the events that they've been through in a healthy way. They weren't able to process them, and they're still stuck in a mode of fight or flight that they haven't got out of. It could be fight, flight, or freeze. And so what you find a lot in PTSD is there's always going to be an intrusion symptom. That's like a flashback or a nightmare. These are known as hyperarousal symptoms. And then you have things that are like dissociative symptoms, where you might engage in this thing called maladaptive daydreaming, where you're out of it all day, you're daydreaming, or you're disassociating, you're out of it. So, you know, some people, they go scroll on their phone for hours, and they're in this, this state of freeze. That's like a state of freeze that they're in. That's disassociation. It can be. Or they're watching TV or playing video games for a long time. Or some people just stare at the ceiling in their bed and they're just paralyzed.
Wow. So, I mean, all of these are basically trauma responses.
They can be, yes. And so a huge element of PTSD is also avoidance. That could be avoidance of people, places, or things that remind you of the event. So, and when I used to think of this, I thought it meant, I don't want to go back to my childhood home because that reminds me. But it's not only things. It also can be people that remind you of the event too, which I find very interesting. So sometimes you might have went through something with someone and maybe they weren't the cause of the stressor, but you might find yourself like, why am I avoiding my sibling? Like, he didn't do anything to me. And then you're like, you don't realize, but maybe your sibling reminds you of the things you've been through, and it's really hard to face it.
Wow. I mean, that makes so much sense, though. That really does. And that can explain a lot of times why people with trauma do like to avoid.
Yes, they're not only avoiding a huge element of trauma, it's also avoiding the uncomfortable thoughts, the uncomfortable emotions. There are so many avoidance behaviors that everyday people engage in, but especially a trauma victim. They are avoiding something.
Oh, definitely.
If they have PTSD, that is. Not everybody's avoiding everything. So another thing that comes up, too, in trauma victims, or PTSD victims, I mean, they'll start to believe you have these changes in your cognitions. The world is no longer safe. The world is no longer safe. Or maybe if you have developmental trauma, maybe you never got to believe the world was ever safe, which is crazy. You never were able to believe that the world was a safe place for you. Maybe you think that people can't be trusted. Maybe you develop a sense of paranoia about people. I know a lot of people who have been through trauma, and rightfully so, that their paranoia developed because you couldn't even trust your own parents.
Well, yeah, you hear so many stories of parents just going behind their kids' back, doing some of the most heartless things, and you're just like, how can a parent do that to somebody?
Especially their own child.
Especially your own child. Like, you're supposed to take care of that kid. What is wrong with you?
Exactly. And so something else that comes up, hypervigilance. You see this on people. If you're with somebody who has PTSD, they might walk into a restaurant and they're sitting on you'll see, they'll strategically sit somewhere so they can see the door. They can see everybody coming in. They're looking around. They're seeing what's going on. You ever hung out with somebody where everything they're hearing the conversation at the table behind them, and they're watching the person all the way across the room. They're like, oh, I just saw this. This guy at this table over here, he looks mad at his wife. He's about to, and you're just watching everything. And it's not that they're fully nosy. Maybe they're a little nosy.
I experience this every single time we go out ever, anywhere. This is what she does all day long.
And I don't know what element of that is just being in the field and reading people and being nosy, but honestly, it can come from trauma of like, I don't know, you're on guard. You're like, what's going on in here? Is there a sense of danger? Do I need to look out? Things like that.
Well, it makes sense that you would be like on high alert. You had to be on high alert your entire life.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. You're validating me. That's very good.
Hey, you do find some interesting things going on that I would never have saw. So you do entertain me with it.
And honestly, it is kind of crazy how many times I do turn out right.
You
about
do.
what I'm saying.
No, she's right. She's like Nostradamus almost. She's making predictions. She's like, this person right here is doing this, and then you listen for 2 seconds, and it's like, bang, there it goes. And you're like, whoa.
Or the person storms out and they're crying because it escalated, and I already knew it was about to or something.
I was just so clueless the entire time. I'm just in my own little world, doing my own little thing, and you're just over here just watching the entire room. I mean, that has to be exhausting, though.
Oh, I love that you brought that up. When I'm in therapy with people, I say to them, wow, that must have been so exhausting. That must be an exhausting way to live. And you should see the relief they hear the relief on their face when they hear that. Because they're like, oh, wow. Yes. Is this the way to live? Is this the way? Because it's been helpful. It helped you through. It's certainly a strength, but is it always the way? Is it the way now?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yes. Exactly. Sometimes you might have to learn how to regulate it a little, just a tad,
And we'll get into that too. But so another thing you notice are sleep disturbances, difficulty concentrating. A lot of people come in to the office where I work right now, and I do psychological evaluations. Because if you guys didn't know, I have my master's in clinical psychology. I'm not licensed. I do this as a student. I'm in my 4th year of doctoral school. But people come in for ADHD testing, and it's like people are so eager to ask about ADHD, but what a lot of people don't realize is that they have trauma, and they don't even realize it. In that difficulty concentrating, you'll look at all the environments that they're in. They won't have it in this, maybe at work, but then for some reason they're having it at home, and you're looking at the environment of home, and home has stressors in it. Home has mom still living with mom or still living with dad. Of course you're not going to concentrate. You're still on guard when mom and dad are around. They stress you out. You're being reminded of all these things. So I realize in Christian circles, there is something scary about the word trauma. I think a lot of Christians, and tell me what you think about this, they are so humble. They are so humble that they are not going to say they have trauma. It feels like that is reserved. That is the highest honor for like a war veteran or something. Like, that's not me. You know, mom and dad were mean, or they tried their best, you know, blah, blah, blah. But then they're like, but I didn't have that. I can't call it that. And then you'll be talking to somebody in therapy or assessment, and you'll see how bad some things did affect them. And you're like, well, and you say it too. And sometimes you don't say it, but it's like deep down people do know. They do know. They're avoiding it though. They're avoiding the truth that they know they have trauma. All right. So another thing that you might see are like sleep disturbances, recklessness, self-destructive habits, or self-fulfilling destructive behaviors. Like, that could be sex, drugs, excessive spending, going out with like the wrong kind of people, you know, romantically pursuing people, and a lot of these things, or overeating, like binge eating too. A lot of these things can stem from self-hate. You see that people sometimes they feel like they're not deserving of good things, so they'll go out and, you know, sabotage themselves, because maybe in childhood their parents taught them that you don't deserve to be healthy. Honestly, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. In your most developmental years, if you're being neglected, I mean, your brain is going to start picking up on that. It's going to start recognizing these little patterns, and you're going to believe that this is what it's supposed to be. Yeah. You're not supposed to take care of yourself or care for yourself, because if my parents or my caregivers aren't, why would I? Well, if you believe growing up that you shouldn't take good care of yourself, then it will be a cognitive dissonance if you're out here taking care of yourself, or you're out here exercising or eating healthy or whatever, because that's cognitive dissonance right there. Who is that? I don't know that person. Yeah, because I don't deserve that. I don't. And when I say deserve, I don't mean that we obviously, like, as children of God, at one time, honestly, we're not owed anything in life. We don't deserve anything. But as children of God, we are called to take care of ourselves and to love. You know how it says to love yourself, like to love your neighbor as yourself. So people on Instagram have a lot of questions for me if I say that you should love yourself. And what I mean by love yourself is, you know, when somebody has trauma or developmental trauma with a caregiver, the default, you know, the human default is loving yourself already. But when you have trauma like that, the default is to hate yourself. And so when I say you should love yourself, I'm talking to the people who hate themselves. I'm not talking to the lovers of self that we know and love, you know, those people. No, definitely. Oh, we all know someone like that. And it's like what we talked about in an earlier episode. Having excessive self-hate is basically on the opposite side of the scale of excessive pride, but neither is good for you. You have to recognize who you are as a child of God and how God views you. God does not want you to hate yourself, because God does not hate you. God loves you. He loves you so much. He does not want to see you depressed. He does not want to see you upset and thinking so down on yourself. You have to remember that as a Christian and as a child of His, you have immense value in just being that. Okay, so another sign of trauma is just people who are always on guard or fighting, always on defense mode. Maybe they're triggered a lot and they're very sensitive, so they might see something where maybe there isn't anything. They might read into situations. They might be very deep thinkers to a fault. Being a deep thinker I love, and I'm very biased toward being a deep thinker, but trauma can make you very sensitive, and there's a lot of triggers that can come from that. And so these are just some signs. There's a lot of other signs too, but those are just the main ones that we see in the DSM criteria. We could honestly do a full hour podcast or longer talking about all the signs and symptoms. But those are like the main ones though. All right. What is the impact of trauma on an individual? Okay. Like I said on the last question, honestly, if you could think of any impact and it has to do with trauma, you name it, and it's probably an impact of trauma, okay? Like, for example, like we were even saying, self-hate,
self-doubt, all of those different things. And what we also mostly notice in trauma is the fight, flight, and freeze response that can occur. Now, if you know what these are, like flight is obviously running. That could be like fleeing the scene, avoiding, fighting, aggression, getting, fighting, just like I said with the triggers, and getting aggressive and being on defense. Or freeze, like dissociative symptoms. The body is still believing that it's in the trauma today. It doesn't know that you left that state of trauma, that you left it. So the body is still working really hard, and there's actually it's shown that there's, in research, there are effects on the brain where the brain is still believing that it should be in fight or flight or freeze mode because the trauma's still there, even if you're safe. And what we find, and this is interesting, a lot of people actually some people don't even have any traumatic responses much until after the trauma's done and they're in a safe environment because their body is finally like, okay, we got to process this now. So yeah, the body essentially gets stuck in a state of survival. You also can see a lot of heightened fear, heightened anxiety. Like we said earlier, changes to cognition. But guys, I hate to say it. Actually, I love to say it, actually. It's not only an effect on your mind, it is also on the body. Trauma also affects your body. And we've talked about this in a few other episodes, and I've alluded to it. Trauma is not only a change in your thoughts and the way you look at the world. Trauma can also affect your body. And your body is stuck in this like survival mode. Your body can become, honestly, you can have chronic pain from the situations. You can have certain like chronic pain and illnesses from the situation. You can also remember certain events and tie them into areas of your body without even remembering the event. Like you might start to feel anxiety in your chest, in your throat, stomach pain, a lot of like IBS symptoms, things like that. So there's a lot of an effect on the body. So a lot of people will have a traumatic response or have anxiety because there's a core, like let's say somebody's in a crowd and they have trauma in something that has to do with crowds, and they go into the crowd and they're standing there, they're having a panic attack, and the panic attack is rooted in the trauma, but they're not sure why they're having a panic attack. So they're trying to check their mind because maybe they had a friend who was like, no, it's all about mindset, you got to change your thoughts. And they're really trying to sift through their brain and figure out what is going on that's making me have this. And they can't find a thought attached to this panic attack. And maybe it's some kind of trauma that's actually stuck in the body that is a reminder, a subconscious reminder of an event that might not be attached to language or words. Or if it is attached to language or words, it's so deep beneath the surface because over time, you lose yourself so much that you can't connect to your thoughts anymore or really connect to what's actually going on. So it's an interesting thing. Maybe the thought attached is that nobody's safe and something bad's about to happen. Maybe they don't even realize there is a thought attached because trauma they get buried. People get buried in their trauma. And also an effect of PTSD or trauma. People become really good intellectualizers. It's where they sit in their head all day long and figure out, and they become hyper self-aware. I know why I am the way that I am. My mom was like this, and she did that, and she made me into this person because she, all this. And they're just explaining it away. They're explaining what happened and why it happened. And really what they're doing is they're losing connection from their body because they're not emotionally processing anything because they're living in their head. And so, so some people, though, they get hyper emotional and not rational enough in their brain. So it's all about balance, right? So, there's a lot of different things. Oh, some people, it can mimic depression symptoms. PTSD can. Feeling detached, a lack of pleasure, numbing out. Oh. Numbing out is a huge one.
So this is kind of what you mean, what people mean when they say, like, don't self-diagnose. There can be so many different symptoms of so many different things that overlap.
Yes. I love that you brought that up. Yeah, you guys, there are so many things that you're not taking into account when you see that TikTok video and you're like, oh, I think I have ADHD now, or I have autism. You're not taking into account the 100 other diagnoses. When somebody looks at you and diagnoses you, they should have like 1,000 diagnoses in their brain that they're shifting through when they're looking at your case. And so I love that you brought that up, Zach, because we are in a time where people come in for assessment and they're like, this is what I have.
Well, we have a lot of information, and we're able
Yes.
to access that information very easily nowadays. And sometimes that's not great. You know, it's always great to be able to get information at like the tap of a finger. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you do need to have a little bit more of a there's a lot to it. You know, it's very complex.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And it's crazy to hear how much trauma can really affect a person. Like, it's insane to hear that your brain will literally get stuck in a moment of time, or it'll get stuck in your body somewhere, or just a time of the year, a specific time of the year. Let's say if you had something traumatic happen to you at Christmas time, maybe next Christmas, or Christmas later on, 30 years from now, you just get tense and scared and or nervous and you're wondering why.
I love that you brought that up because the body can actually remember the weather that day of the traumatic event, and then you hate when it's cold outside.
True. So just on a random cold day,
Crisp
you're just
December
nervous,
morning, yeah,
depressed feeling,
and you
upset,
don't know why.
and it's just trauma. Something happened to you, and that's insane. And I mean, it sounds like trauma. There's so much negativity from it, but can you tell me any good things that could possibly come from trauma?
I love this because when I post about that online, a lot of people who have the Christian mindset or the positive psychology movement mindset love when I bring this up. But I will say a lot of people don't like it. A lot of people don't like the idea, and that there is so much research coming out in post-traumatic growth of the good that can come from trauma. And I know it's hard. It's hard to reconcile those ideas in your head that good things can come from bad things, but isn't that the gospel?
Exactly.
Okay? So, yes, good bit of research showing that this thing can happen called post-traumatic growth. And that's basically when good things come from your trauma. And so I like to give it the nickname of superpowers that come from trauma.
I like that.
Yeah, like you can get really good at reading people, reading situations, reading emotions. It can really make you a good empathetic counselor or helper or just minister. It can help you share the gospel. It can help you a lot of different ways, like evangelistically. It can help you develop this intense drive to get things done and to be a high achiever. There's a lot of research on that. And then also, it can make you creative. That one just hit me in my head a little bit.
You definitely have that one.
Oh, yeah. It can make you a very creative person where you just love to create and make, and you're an artist, and you just see life differently. You're deeper. Also, you can develop just this zeal for life, which I know it sounds crazy because sometimes PTSD can result in like not feeling good about life, but this can actually sometimes, some of the research shows it can make you develop a zeal and an appreciation for the little things in life. It can also give you an increased resiliency. It can give you self-awareness. Okay, but sometimes to a fault, but self-awareness is a great thing, guys. Self-awareness can really level you up in a lot of different ways in your life.
Oh yeah, I think we all know people that are not self-aware, and it's not easy to deal with them.
It is a nightmare when somebody doesn't have at least a little bit. They just don't understand how they affect people. You have to have a little bit of self-awareness in yourself, because when you have self-awareness in yourself, you're really good at working with people, because when you know yourself, then that's when you can begin to know other people. I saw this one quote that said, people will only emotionally take you as far as they've taken themselves. So people are going to really neglect your emotions if they haven't been able to tend to their own.
Exactly. How could they? They don't know how to.
Yeah, so it's really actually a really noble thing. It's actually brave to be able to go into the inner parts of yourself and figure out what's going on. I don't think we talk about how brave that really is when somebody can.
Extremely.
Yeah. And all of this, the post-traumatic growth research, it reminds me of one of my favorite verses. It's Romans chapter 5, verse 3 through 5. It says, "Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us.
Beautiful.
I absolutely love that verse, because it shows us that God, it tangibly shows us how God takes our sufferings and makes them into something so beautiful. And then you also see all this research coming out where the Bible was right. Can you believe that a book written thousands of years ago predicted all of this?
It's insane.
It's actually really cool. And then people are like, oh, it's not academic integrity to believe in the Bible and psychology. But the Bible's just aligning with a lot of things I'm learning.
This is why we say biblical psychology. When you actually read the Bible and live your life based upon how God laid it out for us to live, it is crazy how much it lines up with what psychology says today and how you can help yourself and what to do. And like say positive mindset, things like that. There's just so much appreciation, things like that. And I think a lot of people get caught up on when we say trauma can be a good thing. Trauma is never good.
Mm-mm.
You know, trauma is not good. But as you said earlier, the thing with the gospel is God will take your flaws. God will take something. Well, I'm not saying trauma is a flaw, but
Yeah.
God will take things that happen to you, and He will plant one seed, and the field will grow.
Mm-hmm.
It is insane what God can do with you. And when He gives you something, or when He puts you through something like that, there's a reason for it.
Or if He allows it.
If He allows it to happen to you, there's a reason why He allows it. Because He will turn a dying something horrible into something beautiful.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean when your friend is suffering to tell them, oh, everything happens for a reason.
No.
Yeah, and we're not saying that. We're telling you it is true. God allows everything for a reason. But sometimes your friend who's suffering, they might not need to hear that. Maybe they need to just have you sit with them and put your hand on their back and pray for them, or maybe just say nothing. Just sit with them and just let them. And I think a lot of people, we want to find solutions. And sometimes as friends and family of people who suffer and people who have trauma, sometimes they just need somebody to sit with them.
And I mean, hey, that reminds me of the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept.
Oh.
You know, when Lazarus died, Jesus knew He was going to raise him. He was fine, but He still sat with us. He still cried. He still felt our emotions, and He was there for us in that moment.
Yeah.
How would you start to heal from trauma?
Guys, do you guys want like a whole series on this?
I think that it's for the best.
It is for the best. But I want to tell you guys, I was thinking about it. And there's some debate between the Christian circles and psychology. And the debate is, do people need to go into the past to actually heal? Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't believe you always have to go into the past, but I do believe there will always be an element of facing it. However, whether you're facing the past or just the discomfort, maybe you're facing the uncomfortable emotions or thoughts that are attached or that were a result of the trauma. Maybe you're not actually facing the memory itself or going into it, but you're facing something you've been avoiding. You've been running from something. For some people, they've been running from the Lord. They've been running from what He's trying to tell them about their trauma, about the narrative of their life, because they are afraid. People are afraid. And when somebody's been through trauma, and I know the enemy hates this episode, by the way.
Oh, he's going to hate every episode.
Oh, I
That's
know.
the goal.
I feel this pushback.
That's the
for
goal
real.
of this podcast.
You guys pray for us. Okay. But
Please.
people tend to get stuck into these modes. Remember when I said earlier, you're either thinking too much and only in your head, as known as intellectualizing, or you're too emotional and triggered over everything, and you're letting your emotions rule over you. And when you let your emotions rule over you, you are going to be a hot mess. You're going to be in 1,000 different places at once, and one day you're going to be swayed by the littlest thing. We have to be rooted in Christ, in our foundation, in our rock. So some people might even oscillate between one day in their heads or one day too much in their emotions. What I've found is that healing is a two-way street. There's an emotional route and then there's a cognitive route. We have to change those thoughts, but maybe we also just need to pray and cry. And the cool thing about the gospel, the cool thing about God, is he goes into the places where there's no language. The thing that we get caught up in these Christian circles is we tell people, it's all in your head, or you need to get out of your head, or you need to pray more. And people are like, I truly believe this in my head. I truly believe that God is good, but it's like I know what is right, but I just keep doing what's wrong, or it's like I'm stuck. It's like people feel stuck. And the cool thing is that it's not all in your head, as we see in trauma. It's also in your body. And the crazy cool thing is God goes into the places where there's no language attached. So when you ask a secular person about healing the body, they'll say meditation and things of that sort.
Yeah, they're trying to do God light, basically.
It's very just like
they're
God.
They're trying to get spiritual, but they don't want to get spiritual. You have to.
We are spiritual
We're spiritual beings, 100%.
And even the secular people are like, well, yeah, you'd have to meditate. So what you do is with God is like you pray, and God goes into those places with you, and meditate on scripture is so powerful. Just meditating on the truth of the word, slowing down and letting yourself finally feel some of those things that you have buried deep, deep down. And so maybe it's allowing yourself to feel, maybe it's restructuring some of those old thoughts about trust in people, or just all those different things that can happen, or thoughts about hating yourself. Maybe it's a little bit of both. But the cool thing is, even research shows that like meditation and prayer and all these things can help. Also, humans heal in relationship. Isn't that the gospel? Jesus reconciling himself back to us through relationship.
I love that.
Yeah, so it's very powerful to be in relationships. You know what the devil hates is when people who have been through trauma start to open up. They stop being afraid to share their story. When those words, remember the woman at the well, when she finally, she was probably feeling a little bit ashamed that she had 5 husbands.
Oh yeah. 100%.
And then she goes out into the town and she says, this man has told me everything I've ever done. And she's so like proud now. Like she's not in the bad way of pride, but she's up there and she's like, this man is, and she's not even ashamed of it.
No, it's
she's like, he's shown me who I am.
A weight was lifted off her shoulders in that second because she knew that about herself. The town knew that about herself, but she was finally able to let that go.
But isn't that empowering though? The narrative is now
it's switched.
Yes, and so the thing is telling your narrative. There's a therapy called narrative therapy, and
what's that?
It's just about telling the story of your life and reframing it.
I love that.
That's like a testimony.
It's crazy. Like we say, biblical psychology. Look at the Bible, people.
Yeah,
it's all there.
Well, it's Christian psychology. Is the lens that because it's an official title that people, a lot of people don't know about this. So when people on Instagram make comments about how bad it is to look at things through, this is actually a real theory, Christian psychology.
Who do you think is telling people that?
Oh, just random people.
We just said, the enemy.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, exactly. He wants people to believe that.
Yeah, so it's reforming an understanding of the event in like it's kind of like in the testimony way, where you start to see God's hand in it, maybe even in places where you didn't see him before, kind of going back to Psalm 23, where it says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, even when you don't feel him, he's crafting that story. He's ready for you he's going to rewrite that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's really a cool thing. I really do like the idea of narrative therapy and being able to just rewrite. It's just very empowering. And it also I can just see this image of chains break, bondage breaks when people are able to share their stories. It's so healing. It's so healing to share your story when you're ready. You don't have to. And if honestly, you can take time to craft your story. You don't have to come out about it until you're fully ready, or just tell pieces of it. That's okay too. You don't have to. But when you finally do, you'll feel the release.
Exactly. And you'll never know who you impact by telling that story, who's also going through something very similar. And they just need that little bit of hope to know, hey, you got through this, I can get through this as well.
Yeah. And obviously I haven't said everything on this, but I do want to end with one of the most powerful healing tools I've ever learned in my life.
And what's that?
And it's hard to understand, and you guys, you might not like it, but at the end of the day, the healing process has to do with a lot of release, a lot of surrendering, and a lot of remembering that you'll never be able to understand all of it. When Job confronted God, so to speak, and he came to God and he said, he's trying to figure out, why did this all happen? I'm righteous and holy and this and that.
True.
And God said, were you here when I laid the earth's foundation and I set the stars into motion? Even if I tried to explain it, Job, you would not understand it, because we are not God. We are like, I saw this quote, I'm not taking credit for it, but it was a quote that was like, God is the ocean and we are just red Solo cups. So we can't grasp the amount of knowledge and understanding that God has, and we never will be able to. And I think we want so badly to understand things. And part of the healing process is laying down your pride and saying, and being humble and saying, Lord, I surrender this to you, and I know I will never fully understand it.
Exactly.
And that's okay.
And that's perfect, because think about how many people might say, I was an innocent child with a narcissistic parent that just kept attacking me. Why? You'll never figure that out. You never will.
Or some things are so evil, they don't deserve a psychological explanation.
They don't.
Some things were just purely evil.
Exactly. That's the answer.
You did not deserve what you went through. I know a lot of people are like, well, I'm bad. I'm a human. Humans are bad. We're inherently bad. Okay, yes, we were not made. We are not good before God. No. But you did not, as a child, and the things you've been through, you did not deserve. You did not deserve that.
Never.
And that is not what God wanted for you. And he allowed it to happen for a time such as this, so that now you can go on and share your story and share your testimony and help heal yourself. I mean, well, God will heal you, but you'll be able to help heal others, and others will go, just like the woman at the well, after they find the Lord, because of your story, they'll be able to heal too.
Exactly. And how many times in the Bible do we see situations where God has a will for, or God has a plan for humans go off track? God does not throw the plan away. He says, okay, you went that way, we'll bring you back this way.
He refines it. He restructures it.
100%. And it's beautiful.
It's kind of incredible that he can do that. But it's beyond me.
Honestly. You
guys, this has been a wonderful episode. Obviously, I'm very passionate about the effects of trauma. And I know that the enemy shakes, but when he hears people talking about this kind of topic and healing with God, and I just want to encourage you today that healing is possible, and you are not too broken, that the Lord wants to heal you. He wants to rewrite. Let the Lord rewrite your story. Give him back the pen. He's going to take care of you. Healing is possible. Guys, there is so much research too that shows that yes, there are effects on the brain, but guess what? Your brain, the neurons in your brain are always changing and always restructuring, and healing is 100% possible. And the Lord can heal, and he does heal. He still heals today, and he will heal you. And that might look different for every person, but healing is possible, and just hold on, okay? Because you got this.
I love that,
or
Reema.
You don't got this. God got this.
Amen. Reema, thank you for being so vulnerable.
Do you think I was?
I think you were. You've been very vulnerable, with everything you've done, the whole Instagram. You've always told your story, and I find it so beautiful. And you inspire me so much through all that.
Oh, thank you. I try not to dote too much on my one anecdotal story with my childhood, but I do think that God's glory can shine through it all the more when I'm in school to be a psychologist, and I've been through 9 of the ACEs,
Well, I mean, all this stuff you're saying about how God will take something bad that happened to you and he can give you superpowers, I see that in you every single day.
Don't gas me up too much.
Well, don't worry. The beans you ate earlier have already done that. But
or that Korean beef and rice that you made.
Hey, that was good.
It was good.
I'll deal with any consequences that come from that.
Good job. It was really good. Thank you.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
No, you guys. I just love this topic. I could sit here all night with you guys.
Trust me. She will be making more episodes on this.
Okay.
This is not going to stop. This is not the only one we'll talk about. If you guys want to hear more about trauma, she could talk for days on this.
You've awoken a beast.
Yeah, you've awoken a beast in her, and if we're talking about this for days, I might take a nap and let her talk about it for a little bit. Let her just go.
Honestly, I feel like I could.
Oh, yeah, you could talk nonstop about this, and that it's incredible.
We don't even need a host or a producer.
No, I don't think you need a host. You're pretty good.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just here because I like to be here with you.
Oh, well, I like you being here, and honestly, I can't do it without you.
I'm just my presence, and just you're like, hey, I just need this cool dude in here with me.
I can't get my eyes off you.
I love that. All right, guys. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode. You know, we're being more consistent now. We're still not on a set schedule, but we're trying to get an episode out about once a week. And eventually we'll maybe even try to pick that up a little bit more.
Yeah.
So, Reema, thank you so much. I loved talking to you today. I loved hearing it. You are awesome, as always. People listening, you guys are awesome. If you're actually listening to this whole episode, thank you so much. You guys are the best. And you know what? Send us questions, whatever you need to do. We'd love to cover them. Thank you so much.
Yes, we love you guys. Bye.
All right, bye.